The kiss that saved her life lasted exactly 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds would change everything for both of them. As Eliza Montgomery's throat closed from anaphylactic shock in the back of his taxi, single father Marco Reyes made a split-second decision that would entangle their worlds in ways neither could have imagined. If you're wondering how a struggling taxi driver with custody of his 8-year-old daughter ended up married to one of the wealthiest women in America, you're about to find out. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that prove life is stranger, and more beautiful, than fiction. Marco never planned to be a hero that rainy Tuesday night. After 14 hours behind the wheel, all he wanted was to pick up his daughter from his sister's apartment before she fell asleep. One last fare, he promised himself, watching the elegant woman in the designer coat slide into his back seat, raindrops glistening in her dark hair. "St. Regis Hotel, please," she said, her voice carrying the polished edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She was typing furiously on her phone, barely glancing up. Marco nodded, pulling into traffic. Just another wealthy passenger, he thought. Just another invisible service worker in her world. 10 minutes into the drive, he heard a strange gasping sound. In the rearview mirror, he saw her clutching her throat, her face flushing an alarming shade of red. "Miss? Are you okay?" he called, alarm rising in his chest. She shook her head frantically, fumbling with her purse. "AP," she wheezed, unable to finish the word. Marco swerved to the curb, heart pounding. He jumped out and yanked open her door. Her lips were turning blue, her eyes wide with terror. "Epinephrine? EpiPen?" he asked urgently. She nodded, still struggling to breathe. Marco dumped the contents of her purse onto the seat. "No EpiPen." Her breathing was becoming more labored by the second. "Hospital's 6 blocks away in this traffic," he muttered, making a split-second decision. He'd seen this before. His daughter Lucia had the same severe allergy to peanuts. "I have an EpiPen in my glove compartment," he told her, already running to retrieve it. "It's my daughter's, but it might save your life." Her eyes followed him, desperate and grateful. When he returned with the auto-injector, her consciousness was fading. He knew the procedure, he'd practiced it countless times with Lucia's doctor. But as he prepared to administer the injection, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The seal was broken. The EpiPen had already been used. The woman was barely conscious now. Marco made a desperate calculation. His daughter had once been saved by a paramedic who recognized the signs of anaphylaxis and administered an emergency treatment before the ambulance arrived, a treatment that involved transferring a tiny amount of epinephrine mouth to mouth. Without hesitation, Marco reached into his pocket for the emergency epinephrine tablets he always carried. He placed one under his tongue, letting it dissolve partially. Then, with a silent prayer, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, transferring the life-saving medication. 3 seconds. That's all it took. Her eyes flew open, startled by the intimate contact but too desperate for air to protest. Gradually, her breathing eased. By the time the ambulance arrived 4 minutes later, she was sitting up, color returning to her face. "You saved my life," she whispered, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Marco shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. What Marco didn't know as the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance was that Eliza Montgomery wasn't just any wealthy woman. She was the sole heir to the Montgomery media empire, worth billions, and famously private. And she had just experienced the first selfless act she'd encountered in years. "Your name," she called out as they closed the ambulance doors. "Please, tell me your name." "Marco." "Marco Reyes," he answered, never imagining those 3 words would change his life forever. 3 days later, Marco was struggling to make rent. The hospital visit had used his daughter's only EpiPen, and insurance wouldn't cover a replacement for another 2 weeks. He was parked outside his apartment, calculating how many extra shifts he'd need to afford the $600 out-of-pocket cost, when a sleek black car pulled up beside him. A window rolled down, revealing the woman from the taxi. "Mr. Reyes," she said. "I've been looking for you." Marco stared, surprised she'd remembered his name. "How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you." She stepped out of the car, looking both powerful and somehow vulnerable in her tailored suit. "I'd like to repay you." Before he could protest, she handed him an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. "I can't accept this," he said immediately, trying to return it. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would do." She smiled sadly. "That's where you're wrong. Do you know how many people passed by before you stopped?" "3. 3 people saw me struggling to breathe and kept walking." Marco didn't know what to say to that. "Please," she continued. "If not for yourself, then for your daughter. You mentioned she has allergies too." The mention of Lucia made Marco hesitate. The money would change everything. He could afford better healthcare, maybe even move to a safer neighborhood with better schools. "I'll think about it," he finally said. Eliza nodded, handing him a business card. "Call me when you decide." "And Marco? Thank you again." As she turned to leave, a small voice called out from the apartment building. "Daddy!" Lucia came running down the steps, her dark braids bouncing, backpack still on from after-school care. She threw herself into Marco's arms. "Hey, Mija," he said, hugging her tight. "How was school?" "Good. I got an A on my science project." She noticed Eliza standing nearby. "Who's that, Daddy?" Marco hesitated. "This is Ms. Montgomery. She was a passenger in my taxi." Eliza knelt down to Lucia's level. "Your dad is a hero, did you know that? He saved my life." Lucia beamed. "He's always a hero. He saves me all the time too." Something in Eliza's expression shifted as she looked between father and daughter. Later, she would tell Marco that was the moment everything changed for her, seeing the love between them, so pure and uncomplicated, so different from her own cold upbringing. "Would you both like to have dinner?" she asked impulsively. "To thank your father properly." Marco started to decline, but Lucia was already nodding enthusiastically. "Can we, Daddy? Please." And that was how Marco Reyes and his daughter ended up dining at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city with Eliza Montgomery, while she listened intently to Lucia's stories about school and her dream of becoming a doctor someday. What began as a thank you dinner evolved into something neither expected. Eliza, isolated by her wealth and position, found herself drawn to Marco's genuine warmth and Lucia's infectious enthusiasm. Marco, initially wary of Eliza's privileged world, discovered a woman fighting her own battles beneath the polished exterior. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Marco worked 16-hour days to provide for his daughter after his wife abandoned them years ago. Eliza managed a media empire while fending off board members who thought a woman too emotional to lead, all while carrying the weight of her father's legacy. Yet somehow, they fit. Over the following months, Eliza became a regular visitor at their small apartment. She helped Lucia with homework and brought Marco coffee during late-night shifts. He showed her parts of the city she'd never seen despite living there her entire life: community gardens, family-owned restaurants, neighborhoods where people knew each other's names. For the first time, Eliza experienced life without the barrier of wealth between her and others. With Marco and Lucia, she was just Eliza, not the Montgomery heiress, not the billionaire CEO, just a woman learning to open her heart again. But their growing relationship faced obstacles neither had anticipated. The board of Montgomery Media, already skeptical of Eliza's leadership, viewed her relationship with a taxi driver as further evidence of her unfitness to lead. Tabloids published invasive photos and speculated about Marco's motives. Even Marco's fellow drivers began treating him differently, assuming he was using Eliza for her money. The pressure reached a breaking point when Lucia came home from school in tears, having overheard classmates repeating cruel gossip their parents had shared. "They said Daddy only likes Ms. Eliza because she's rich," she sobbed into Marco's shoulder. "But that's not true. You liked her before you knew, right, Daddy?" Marco held his daughter close, his heart breaking. That night, he called Eliza. "We need to talk," he said quietly. They met at a small park where they'd often taken Lucia to play. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath their feet as they walked in silence. "This isn't working," Marco finally said. "Our worlds are too different." Eliza stopped walking. "Is that what you believe, or what everyone else is telling you to believe? Does it matter? Look at what this is doing to Lucia. To your company. To us." "It matters to me," Eliza said fiercely. "Because I've spent my entire life letting other people define what I should want, who I should be. And then you came along, you saved my life without wanting anything in return. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Marco looked away. "I'm just a driver, Eliza. And I'm just a woman who happened to be born into money I didn't earn," she countered. "Why does your job define you more than my inheritance defines me?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. "I love you," she said simply. "I love Lucia. I don't care what the board thinks, or the media, or anyone else." Marco closed his eyes. "I love you too. But love isn't always enough." He walked away that night, convinced he was doing the right thing for everyone. For 3 weeks, they didn't speak. Marco threw himself into work, taking every available shift to distract from the ache in his chest. Lucia grew quiet, her usual exuberance dimmed. Then came the news that shook the financial world. Eliza Montgomery had stepped down as CEO of Montgomery Media, transferring control to a trust with strict ethical guidelines. The press release stated only that she was pursuing personal priorities. The morning after the announcement, Marco found her waiting beside his taxi at his usual starting point. "What have you done?" he asked, stunned. "Made a choice," she said simply. "The company was my father's dream, not mine. I still own it, but I don't need to run it." "But your legacy is mine to define," she interrupted. "Marco, I've spent my life trapped by expectations. The company, the wealth, the responsibility, none of it made me happy. But you and Lucia did." She took his hands in hers. "I'm not asking you to accept my world anymore. I'm asking if there's room in yours for me." That moment, a billionaire heiress standing in the early morning light, asking a taxi driver for a place in his life, would later be captured in a photograph that went viral, becoming a symbol of love transcending boundaries. Their journey wasn't easy. Eliza had to learn to live without the buffer of extreme wealth and privilege, while Marco struggled with the imbalance in their financial situations. They agreed that Eliza would use her resources to establish a foundation supporting children with severe allergies, inspired by Lucia, but their day-to-day life would remain modest. 6 months after their reunion, Marco took Eliza to the spot where he'd saved her life. As rain fell gently around them, echoing that fateful night, he knelt and asked her to be his wife. "You saved me first," she whispered as she said yes. Their wedding was small, family and close friends only. Lucia served as flower girl, beaming with pride as she watched her father marry the woman who had become like a mother to her. Instead of gifts, they asked guests to donate to their foundation, which had already helped provide emergency epinephrine injectors to schools across the city. Today, 3 years later, Marco still drives his taxi occasionally, not because he needs to, but because he wants to. "It keeps me grounded," he explains. And sometimes, extraordinary things happen in ordinary moments. Eliza focuses on their foundation, which has expanded nationwide. They live in a comfortable but modest home, raising Lucia and the twin boys they welcomed last year. Their story reminds us that sometimes, the most life-changing moments come disguised as ordinary days. That sometimes, saving a life means risking your heart. And that love, real love, doesn't see bank accounts or social status, it sees only the person beneath. If you've been moved by Marco and Eliza's journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Because in a world that often feels divided by wealth, status, and power, we need reminders that what truly matters is the courage to reach across those divides, sometimes with something as simple, and as profound, as a life-saving kiss.